receiving the views of the industry that the committee can then consider. Thank you, sir.
Call Claire Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and a Happy New Year to you, and a Happy New Year to all my colleagues on the Commerce Committee. Looking forward to another year of robust discussion and debate on legislation coming before us. And I think it's important to say that despite the robustness of the debate that happens in this House, that in select committees the work of devising new and important laws which upgrade existing laws goes on. And this appears to be one of those pieces of legislation which, as my colleague across the House has noted, fits within a suite of particular legislation which is looking at financial reform, and also fits within the legislation around a harmonisation of law, particularly between New Zealand and Australia. And certainly in principle those things are important. The upgrading of law in this area, the importance of trying to raise awareness of the financial literacy out there in the community and how these sorts of laws operate, and the ensuring that our laws make sense between our closest neighbour, Australia. All of those things are important, and we certainly do support this piece of legislation to a select committee, and we, in principle, support its intent. I have, on closer looking at this bill, do have some questions in my mind that I'm keen to see played out during the discussion in the select committee, and I want to just touch on a couple of those tonight, because we know that there is certainly broad agreement between the New Zealand and to get to the guts of this legislation, it's enabling that harmonisation to take place. That seems to me to be one of the core things that underpins it. It's one of the core reasons for it, and I suspect that it's something that will hasten its process through the second reading and further readings in this House, because it seems that there is quite a lot of support for that. However, it's not universal support, and there were some important issues raised in the discussion that preceded and what happened during the merger discussions between the New Zealand Institute of Chartered Accountants and its Australian counterpart, which I think is worthy of some further scrutiny in the Select Committee. And I'm sure that we will be hearing the voices, particularly of the smaller accountancy firms in New Zealand, particularly, and this is what I would like to hear personally, Mr. Speaker, is smaller firms and also firms in rural and regional New Zealand, so that we can actually hear what their views are on the impact of a merger between the New Zealand and the Australian chartered accountancy groups. Because while big firms, while urban firms may see direct benefits, those benefits don't always naturally accrue throughout the whole of New Zealand. And I've got a little warning bell in the back of my mind around and we must be certain, if we're looking at any changes, potential changes to this bill, that there is no disadvantage happening in rural and regional New Zealand. There are three concerns that I've seen being raised around such a merger. That was a Freudian slip, Mr. Speaker, which may come back to haunt me. However, the concerns were around this being a potential but the perception was that this could be seen as a potential takeover of the New Zealand Institute of Accountants by the Australians. Now, personally, I don't think that's the case. It seems to me that there's been a fairly robust discussion between the two organisations. I've read a number of things that have been written by the Chief Executive of the New Zealand Institute of Chartered Accountants, Craig Norgate, who is very much in favour of the merger and sees some practical benefits accruing to New Zealand. However, also as I pointed out, the representation of those smaller accountancy firms. And another issue that's been raised is the potential, if there is a merger of the two bodies and they become one, then therefore we may see I don't know whether exodus is the right word, but certainly a transfer of some accountants moving across the Tasman, and would that impact New Zealand? So those things are things that I think we must be asking questions about, we must be looking at and thinking about while we're considering this bill. The other issue that I'm interested in teasing out, because this bill has four main aims. There's that amalgamation, which is one. It's the allowing of competent auditors with the appropriate qualifications to offer audit services to New Zealand firms, allowing audit firms to incorporate as companies if they decide that's their most efficient business form for them, and replacing the references to chartered accountant in various acts, etc. But as one of the other changes that will be occurring is how charities, the requirements on charities, as my colleague David Parker touched on, because there will be a requirement for registered charities within this legislation, registered charities of a certain size, to have their financial statements audited or reviewed by a qualified statutory auditor. And the bill makes a differentiation between large charities, those that have operating expenses of more than $1 million, to have their financial statements audited, medium charities with operating expenses of between $500,000 and $1 million. Now they must have their financial statements audited or reviewed, and then smaller charities, and there will be some requirements on them, and I think this is another thing that we must look at carefully. And there are, as I understand it, something like around 26,000 entities on the charities register, which in most of them are small or very small. And so the impact of this on them, as I understand it, is quite all of them is quite minor. But I think that's something that we have to look at carefully, because if there is an onerous impact on particularly those smaller charities, then we have to weigh up the effect that might have. But around 2,800 of those registered charities, as I understand it, are considered put into the large or medium category, and about 80% of those large or medium charities already have an assurance engagement completed. So I suppose if I'm a little bit confused as to what the import of this actual change is going to have, and I do also hope that that the charities are aware that this legislation is going through the House and is going to Select Committee, and that charities do take the time to consider this legislation carefully and do come before us and tell us what they think the impact will be, or ask us to consider certain matters. So I think those are the major issues that leap out at me on first looking at this piece of legislation that is about to hit the Select Committee. As I said, we support it. We think that we agree with its intent. We think that it does fit within the broader scheme of financial changes to financial management of all of those pieces of legislation. We are we will be looking carefully, we will be listening carefully, and we will be listening for the voices of those who are raising concerns and issues with this bill, so that we can be assured that we're not rushing into an amalgamation in a way that may come back to bite us later on.
Call Julianne Genter.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak on the first reading of the